The morning of the christening, the cradle was empty. Not the child. The child was with his nurse, swaddled and sleeping in the room at the end of the hall, his small fists curled against his cheeks, like a man bracing for something. The cradle was empty of everything else. The blanket Eleanor had embroidered over 6 months of careful evenings, the silver rattle that had been her mother's, the small folded note she had written and placed beneath the mattress the night she came home from the hospital alone. All of it gone, taken with her. The Duke of Ashford stood in the doorway of the nursery and understood, for the first time in his 34 years of careful, considered, admirably composed existence, that he had made a catastrophic error. The letter was on his desk. He had passed it 3 times that morning without opening it, assuming it was correspondence from his solicitor. It was not. James, I have gone to my aunt's house in Bath. I have taken nothing that belongs to the Ashford estate. I have left nothing that belongs to me. I am not asking you for anything. I am not accusing you of anything in writing. I think you know what you have done, and I think, somewhere beneath the performance of not knowing, you have always known. Our son's name is William. I chose it because it was my father's name, and because he was a man who stayed. I will not prevent you from knowing your child. I am not that kind of woman, though you may have forgotten, in the course of things, what kind of woman I am. Eleanor. He read it twice. Then he set it down on the desk with the particular care of a man who has just realized the document in his hands is the most important thing he has ever held, and he has been holding it wrong. The marriage had been arranged in the spring of 1814, when Eleanor Voss was 22 and the Duke of Ashford was 31, and neither of them had been consulted about anything that mattered. Her father had been a baronet with more land than money, and a quiet, persistent faith that the world would eventually reward decency. It had not. When he died, Eleanor had been left with a modest inheritance, a stepmother who had never pretended to warmth, and a name that opened doors without quite getting her through them. James Whitmore, 8th Duke of Ashford, had been left with a dukedom, 3 estates, a fortune that required constant management, and a mother who had been telling him for 4 years that he needed an heir. He had been indifferent to the process. He had not been cruel about it. That, Eleanor would later think, was the particular cruelty of it, that he had never been cruel. He had simply been absent, which is a different kind of wound, and in some ways, a worse one. They had married in September. The ceremony had been beautiful. The reception had been attended by 400 people, none of whom Eleanor knew well. James had danced with her once, with precise, courteous attention, and had then spent the remainder of the evening in conversation with men from his club. She had sat beside his mother, the Dowager Duchess Marjorie, who had pressed her hand and said quietly, "He is not a bad man, my dear. He is simply a man who has never been required to be good." Eleanor had not known what to do with that. She had tried, in the year that followed. She had learned the estates, the tenants' names, the rhythms of the household. She had attended every dinner, every social engagement, every morning call that was required of a duchess. She had written to James's secretary when she needed to reach James himself, because James was often, not always, but often, elsewhere. She had not complained. She was not by nature a woman who complained. She was by nature a woman who observed and catalogued and quietly adjusted her expectations downward until they matched the shape of her life. She had discovered she was carrying his child in January. She had told him at breakfast, because breakfast was one of the meals he reliably attended. He had looked up from his newspaper, said, "That's good news," with what appeared to be genuine pleasure, and returned to the paper. She had sat across from him for another 10 minutes, waiting for something more, and then she had excused herself and gone to the garden and stood in the cold for a long time, breathing. The night their son was born, James was at Lord Pemberton's house playing cards. He had been told she was in labor. His valet had come to the card room at 9:30 and delivered the message in a low voice, and James had looked up from his hand. He was holding a strong hand, the kind that comes once in an evening, and said, "Send word when it's done," and returned to his cards. The hand had not been as strong as he'd thought. He'd lost 40 pounds. William Ashford had arrived at 11 minutes past midnight, red-faced and furious and perfect, and Eleanor had held him against her chest in the grey early morning and wept with a specific kind of relief that had nothing to do with the birth being over. It was the relief of finally having someone in the room who was entirely, uncomplicated hers. James had come the next morning. He had stood at the foot of the bed, looked at the child, said, "He looks well, and you look well, and I'll leave you to rest." He had been in the room for perhaps 6 minutes. Eleanor had watched him leave. She had not said anything. She had looked down at William, who was sleeping with his fist pressed against his mouth, and she had thought, with a clarity that surprised her with its quietness, "I cannot do this for the rest of my life." She had not acted on it immediately. She was not impulsive. She had spent 3 more weeks in the house, recovering, nursing, watching James move through the rooms of his own estate, like a man visiting a place he had heard described, but never particularly wanted to see. He had come to the nursery twice. He had asked the nurse questions about feeding schedules with the brisk efficiency of a man gathering information he did not intend to use. On the night before the christening, Eleanor had packed 2 trunks. She had been methodical about it. She had taken her clothes, her books, her mother's jewelry, the letters from her aunt. She had left behind everything that bore the Ashford crest. She had written the note and placed it on James's desk. She had kissed William's forehead in the dark, told him she would see him in the morning, that she was not leaving him, that she was simply leaving, and that he would understand the difference when he was older. She had been gone by 4 in the morning. James did not go to Bath immediately. This was, he would later recognize, the second catastrophic error. The first had been the card game, but the second, the 3 days of standing in his own house, reading her letter at his desk, telling himself he was giving her time, telling himself she would want space, telling himself that going after her would be presumptuous. The second was perhaps worse, because it was not thoughtlessness. It was a choice. He had chosen 3 times in 3 days not to go. On the 4th day, his mother arrived. Marjorie Whitmore, Dowager Duchess of Ashford, was 61 years old and had been described by 4 prime ministers as the most formidable woman in England. She entered James's study without knocking, sat across from his desk in the chair she had always used, and looked at him for a long moment with an expression he had not seen since he was 12 years old and had done something genuinely unforgivable. "You haven't gone," she said. "You haven't gone," she said again, as though he had not spoken. "Your wife left 4 days ago with 2 trunks and an infant, and you have been sitting in this house telling yourself some story about what she needs, and I am here to tell you that the story is wrong." James set down his pen. "She said she wasn't asking for anything." "Yes," said his mother. "That is precisely the problem." She paused. "James, what kind of woman writes a letter that asks for nothing?" He didn't answer. "A woman who has spent years asking for things in smaller ways and receiving nothing," said his mother. and has finally stopped believing that asking will help. She let that sit for a moment. I told you, when you married her, that she was not a woman who would make a scene. I meant it as a reassurance. I see now that I should have meant it as a warning. James stood up from his desk and walked to the window. Outside, the grounds of Ashford House were immaculate and empty. He thought about the morning he had come to the nursery and found the cradle stripped. He thought about the blanket. He had seen her embroidering it in the evenings when he came through the sitting room. He had not asked about it. He had not asked about anything. She named him William, he said, after her father. I know. She said he was a man who stayed. There was a silence. His mother did not fill it. I was playing cards, James said. It was the first time he had said it aloud. It sounded spoken exactly as terrible as it was. Yes, said his mother. I had a message. I knew she was... He stopped. I told them to send word when it was done. Yes. He turned from the window. His mother was watching him with the particular expression she reserved for moments when she had decided that pity would not help and honesty might. What do I do? He said, and it came out rougher than he intended, less ducal, more like the question of a man who has genuinely no idea. You go to Bath, said his mother, and you do not go with explanations. You go with accountability. There is a difference. He arrived at his great-aunt by marriage's house in Bath on a Thursday afternoon, unannounced, which he recognized immediately as another error. The housekeeper looked at him with the specific expression of a woman who had been told, in some detail, about him. Eleanor received him in the sitting room. She was wearing a blue dress he had never seen before. She must have bought it here, or had it made. And she was sitting very straight, and she looked, he thought, better than she had looked in months, rested, certain of herself, like a woman who had put something down that had been very heavy and was only now realizing how long she had been carrying it. William was not in the room. James, she said, not your grace, not my lord. James, Eleanor. He had rehearsed something in the carriage. It had seemed adequate in the carriage. Standing in front of her, it seemed like nothing at all. I owe you an apology. Yes, she said, you do. He had expected her to help him. She did not. She sat and waited, with the composed patience of a woman who had learned, over years of marriage, that filling silences was not always her responsibility. I was playing cards, he said, the night William was born. I received the message and I told them to send word when it was done, as though it were something happening to someone else. He paused. It wasn't. It was happening to you, and I was not there, and I cannot. He stopped again. I cannot explain it in a way that makes it better. I know that. I am not here to make it better. I am here because I have been sitting in that house for 4 days reading your letter and understanding, for the first time, that I have been absent from my own marriage in ways I did not have the awareness to notice. And I am ashamed of it. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her expression that he couldn't name. Not softness, not yet, but something that was at least listening. You said absent, she said. That's the right word. You were never cruel, James. I want you to know I know that, but I spent 2 years learning to need less and less from you because needing things from you was like sending letters to an address where no one lived. She paused. The night William was born, I held him and I thought, here is someone who will need things from me, and I will be there. And I thought, I cannot model for him a life where we accept being afterthoughts. James felt something in his chest that was not entirely unlike what he imagined drowning felt like. "You are not an afterthought," he said. "You were never." "James," her voice was quiet, "I know you believe that, but belief is not the same as behavior, and I have been living inside your behavior for 2 years. He didn't argue with it. He couldn't. She was right in the specific, irrefutable way of someone who has been patient long enough to be very sure. "I am not asking you to come home," she said. "I want you to understand that. I am not. I'm not staging a negotiation. I am simply telling you what it was, because you asked, and because you came, and because I think you deserve to know exactly what you let happen." "I do deserve to know," he said, "and I think, Eleanor, I think I have been telling myself a story about what kind of husband I was, and the story was wrong." He looked at her directly. "I would like the chance to be a different kind, not because it is expected of me, not because my mother came to London and told me to, because I have been walking through that house for 4 days, and every room in it feels like a record of something I failed to notice while it was in front of me." The silence stretched. "Your mother came," Eleanor said. "Yes." "What did she say?" "That there is a difference between explanation and accountability." He paused. She was right. Something shifted in Eleanor's expression, not capitulation. She was not a woman who capitulated, but the beginning of something else, a willingness to remain in the room, a door not quite closed. "William is sleeping," she said. "You may see him when he wakes." He came back the next day, and the day after. He did not stay in the house. He took rooms at the hotel on Milsom Street, and he came each morning, and he stayed until Eleanor asked him to leave, which she did each evening with diminishing certainty. He did not press. He did not argue. He sat in the sitting room and he asked her questions about her aunt, about Bath, about what she had been reading, about what she wanted. And he listened to the answers with the particular attention of a man who has recently discovered that listening is a skill he does not possess and has decided to acquire it immediately. On the 5th day, she let him hold William for an hour. He held his son with the careful terror of a man who has never been trusted with anything fragile and knows it. William regarded him with the ancient, unimpressed gaze of a very young infant, and then fell asleep against his chest. And James sat very still for a long time, not wanting to move, barely breathing, as though the child might change his mind. Eleanor watched from the chair across the room. She did not say anything, but she did not look away. "You could come home," he said, on the 9th day. It was raining. They were in the sitting room with tea going cold between them and William asleep in the next room. "I know I have no right to ask it. I know you are. I can see that you are well here, that you are. You seem like yourself here, in a way that I am not sure I gave you room to be at Ashford House, and I am aware that asking you to return is asking you to trust something I have not yet earned." Eleanor turned her teacup in her hands. "Then why are you asking?" "Because I am trying to be honest with you," he said. "And honestly, I want you to come home. I want to know my son. I want to try to be the husband I should have been from the beginning. And I know that wanting it is not the same as deserving the chance, but I am asking for the chance because the alternative is continuing to live in a house that feels like a record of everything I failed to see." Eleanor set the teacup down. "If I come home," she said slowly, "things would have to be different. Not in the abstract, in specific ways. Tell me the specific ways." She looked at him with something that was almost surprise, as though she had expected him to negotiate, to qualify, to manage. as though directness was not what she had anticipated. "Breakfast," she said. "Together. Not every day, I know your schedule, but as a habit, not an exception." She paused. "When I tell you something matters to me, I need you to treat it as though it matters, not to perform caring, to be present." She paused again. "And when there is a next time, when there is a moment that is mine, that is ours, that requires you to be somewhere, I need you to be there." "Yes," he said. "That's all?" "I'm not negotiating," he said. "I'm agreeing. Those things are, Eleanor, those things are not large things. They are things I should have been doing without being asked." "They felt large," she said quietly, "when they were absent." He looked at her across the cold tea and the rainy window and the 9 days of coming back, and he said, "I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of it, for the card game, for the 6 minutes in your room the morning after, for every breakfast I didn't come to, for every time you needed me to be somewhere and I was somewhere else." He paused. "I cannot give you those years back. I can only tell you that I know what they cost, and that I intend to spend a very long time making the accounting right." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "The christening was last week." "I know. You weren't there for that either." "I know." He didn't flinch from it. "I was sitting in my study reading your letter for the 4th time and telling myself I was giving you space. It was another mistake. I seem to have made a great many of them." "You have," she said, and then very quietly, "But you came. I came. You keep coming back. I intend to keep coming back," he said, "for as long as you will allow it. And if you come home, I intend to stop leaving in the first place." The rain moved against the window. William made a small sound in the next room, the particular sound of a baby deciding whether to wake, and both of them turned toward it instinctively, and then looked back at each other, and something in the looking was different from all the looking that had come before. "I'll think about it," Eleanor said. "That's enough," said James. "That's more than I came here expecting." She came home in October, when the leaves on the Ashford grounds were turning and the house had been, she noticed immediately, altered in small ways. The curtains in the morning room had been changed to ones she had mentioned, once, in passing, that she preferred. The chair she liked to read in had been moved to better catch the light. There was a cradle in the corner of the bedroom, not the one she had taken, but a new one, made from the same pale wood, with the same style of carving, as though someone had paid very close attention to a thing that had been present in the room before it was gone. She stood in the bedroom doorway for a moment, looking at it. James came to stand beside her. He did not say anything. He had, she was beginning to understand, been learning when not to speak. "You had it made," she said. "Yes. It looks like the old one." "I looked at it carefully," he said. "Before you left. I didn't know I was looking at it carefully. I looked at it, and I remembered it." She set William down in it. He settled immediately, with the uncanny contentment of a baby who has no memory of the previous cradle and simply finds this one adequate. She stood over him for a moment, her hand resting on the side rail. "Breakfast tomorrow," she said. "I'll be there," said James. 2 years later, on a morning in November, Eleanor was in the library when James came in from the grounds, still in his riding coat, smelling of cold air and horse, and found her sitting in the chair by the fire with William on her lap, and a book open that neither of them was reading. "He won't nap," she said, without looking up. "He never naps," said James, which was true. William had inherited his mother's precise, cataloguing attention, and his father's stubbornness, and applied both to resisting sleep with an efficiency that his nurse found exhausting, and his parents found, privately, rather admirable. James sat on the arm of the chair, not across from her, beside her, and William immediately transferred his attention to his father's coat buttons, which were new and therefore interesting. "He's going to pull that off," Eleanor said. "Let him." James put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into it with the ease of something that has become habitual, comfortable, no longer something she had to decide to do. "Eleanor." "Tell me again what you wrote in the letter." It had become, over 2 years, a thing they did, not often, only when one of them needed to remember the shape of where they had been in order to properly feel where they were now. She was quiet for a moment. "I wrote that I had taken nothing that belonged to the Ashford estate," she said, "and left nothing that belonged to me." "And?" "And that I was not asking for anything." She paused. "And that William's name was my father's name, because he was a man who stayed." James pressed his lips to her temple. William, having successfully detached the button, held it up with the triumphant expression of a person who has accomplished something important. "I stayed," James said quietly. "You did," said Eleanor. "Eventually. I came to Bath, 9 days in a row. I would have come for 90. She turned her head to look at him. His expression was the one she had come to know best, not the composed ducal face he wore in public, but the one underneath it, the one that had no performance in it at all. "I know," she said. "That's why I came home." William, having examined the button thoroughly and found it satisfactory, placed it carefully in his father's hand with the gravity of a child returning something precious. James closed his fingers around it. Outside, the November grounds were bare and frost-edged and very still, and the fire in the library was the kind that had been burning long enough to be reliable, steady, the kind of warmth that does not announce itself because it no longer needs to. "Thank you for staying with Eleanor and James until the very end." Their story began with an empty cradle and a letter that asked for nothing, and became the long, patient, imperfect work of a man learning to stay and a woman deciding to let him. If you believe that love is not a single grand gesture, but 1,000 small returns, come back, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you never miss another story of impossible distances crossed and hard-won warmth. You are the reason these stories exist.